Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to The What Life. We are racing this evening. So we're into December. It's December 4th, Monday. We are taking part in the 5:10 p.m. UK time Zwift monthly event. And this is a new series of Zwift monthlies, seeing as it's the start of December. I'll dive into my training and how things are going in a second, but let me give you some stats on what we're about to throw down on. So this course is part of the best of section, so I presume over the course of this month we're going to be doing a series of races that could really be anywhere. There's no common theme. I think they're just going to be kind of, hopefully, great races, great courses from any selection. So a little bit lazy from the Zwift guys, if you ask me, but nonetheless it does solve a problem of providing us with some good races, which I'm happy with. We had 150 odd people take part in this race. It was, I thought it was going to be blistering. The start went out quite hard, no harder than kind of most normal starts. It was not a blistering pace off the start line. So with so many people, you sometimes get a real fast section up front, and they just continue the pace. But this actual course, Sand and Sequoias, I can't pronounce it. I don't know. Maybe my reading is not quite up to the level that it should be as a 41-year-old male, but I don't know what this course is called. Anyway, it is 22.4 kilometers long, 13.4 miles, as good as 14 miles. There is 174 meters of elevation. It's a single loop, and for power-ups we have Anvil, Draft, and Feather. Now, to dive into the race itself, as that's giving you the stats on the course, I was a little bit surprised. There's quite a long lead-in this race, and I think in some respects that neutralizes the group. I think some people understand that there's a long lead-in, and some people don't quite work out the gate. So I was definitely surprised at the pace of the group, given that it was a really big group early on. And I think when I looked back at some of the stats, that it definitely kind of cost us, and it cost us quite a lot, because we had really good numbers. We had a huge group, 150, 160 people, which is a huge group for a Zwift monthly race, given that you got Zwift Racing League tomorrow night. And we still, even though we put down a really good time, we did not do as well as the 6:10 p.m. UK race. So just to reiterate that, we had a really big group, but I felt like we didn't quite push the pace hard enough off the start line. And it's really hard to say that, because I understand, or I'm hoping you understand, that I'm not like a front seat driver for these races. Like I'm getting to the point where I'm getting better, so I can hold front groups and I can help push in a front group. But I'm nowhere near like sit on the front and take big pulls. That's not me as a rider. I'm not there yet. But I can recognize when the pace is a little bit off, or when we're pushing hard. And it definitely felt like my heart rate is 146, my watts are around 250, 260. I wasn't getting into the 150s on my heart rate for a large portion of this race. And I fast forwarded the majority of the start because ultimately it was soft. And I can say that because our finish time was 30 minutes and 42 seconds. Now, the guys that did this race an hour after us finished in 30 minutes and 24 seconds, which is fast. Bear in mind that the A category for the 6:10 race, the fast race, finish in 30 minutes and 14 or 15 seconds. So they're literally 9 or 10 seconds behind the A-Cat, because they were a big group of them. They obviously all worked hard throughout the whole thing. Our race, we were a little bit soft through this particular section before we got into Titans Grove and all the little rollers and things that came through there. I think through there we were fine. I think we worked really hard, but it felt like getting there, it was a little bit, but I'm not going to necessarily complain, because as a cyclist, I'm only just catching up to the curve of being able to hold these big front groups and moving fast. So I'm kind of caught in that kind of tricky situation of like, I'm not quite good enough to, work my way to the front, dive into the group chat and say, hey, I think we need to pull a bit harder, like sit on my wheel, I'll take charge. But at the same time, I can recognize when we're in a big group and not quite pushing as hard. And I don't know, like maybe if we'd pushed harder off the start, I might have got dropped off the group a little bit sooner than I did, given that we had all the rollers that came through Titans Grove and whatnot. So that was quite interesting. And if you are interested, let me throw some stats at you for my evening's race. I actually had quite a reasonably easy week last week. I'll be honest with you guys, I got a bit of the, I don't know what you'd call it, but just like that winter blues, that kind of December vibe. I'm finding it hard to keep the motivation high, and motivation follows movement, and I'm struggling a little bit to kind of spend more time on the bike, especially because a lot more of my miles are indoors now. Some of the outdoor miles I do are just like, I just don't really enjoy them because they get cold or you get caught in it's a hard time in the UK to be riding your bike. So I think, guys, I empathize. I feel for you. So if we dive into the race just quickly, someone shoots off the front here, and they shoot off the front. And I message the group and I just say, hey, leave it. This race will, it will sort itself out once we come to the hills. Some guy shoots off the front and disappears a little bit. And I just message the group saying, look, don't panic about that just yet. Because once we get to the hills, that's when it's going to start throwing down and the group will break up. And at this point, there is I think it's like 120 of us in this front group. It's a massive front group as we make our way through up into Titans Grove and whatnot. So my watts for this whole race, like I said, it was a roughly 30 minutes. I think our front group for the B Cat come through in 30:42, and then I come through, I've got to pull the stats up, in 36th place, which is fantastic. I love it. I love being in that kind of top half in 30:54. So I'm just off the pace, but I managed to hold the group for as long as I can, and I think I do a reasonably good job. My average watts for today were 3.7 watts per kg, holding 280 watts for the 30 minutes, and that's normalized to 289. I'll be honest with you, I'm not feeling like in tip-top form the last few weeks. I think I've kind of struggled a bit, as I just said, those winter blues, that motivation, those kind of extra miles. Like in the summer on the long days when you're like, oh, should we just go out and do 80, 90 miles? Because you've got all hours of the day to do it because it's sunny and bright and it's nice to be out on the bike. It's just harder in the winter, guys, and we all recognize that. So these, what I'm actually trying to do is basically just not take too many steps backwards, or just trying to stay still for a little bit, and trying to wait, just kind of leave my motivation, or just wait for my motivation to come find me. But from a racing perspective, once we got into this section, this was a tough little point. And we start getting into all the rollers, and you get, is it called Titans Grove? I think we are heading into Titans Grove KOM. And this was the bit of the race where it was always going to break up. You can see on the mini map that we're stringing out massively. And at this point, I'm feeling pretty good. I think part of that was based on having that kind of slightly less intense lead in / through the sands. What do you call it? Anyway, so once we got to the rollers, I didn't, I felt reasonably okay, but I also think I might have gone a little bit too hard too early. So I definitely pay for that a little bit later. But on the mini-map, you can see that, where we did have a massive group of close to 100 riders, maybe, we've now cut that right down. And we're into like that kind of period where there's maybe 70 riders, which is still a huge amount of riders, and everyone kind of moving on. So the important thing is, from a racing perspective, was to always make sure that you are within touching or spitting distance of the front group. As long as you can throw your bead on at them and hit someone, then you're probably in an alright position. And that's the point that I get to in a second, which is I'm falling off the group and I have to really work, because knowing that if you know that putting in 30 seconds of work when you're feeling horrible is actually going to make the next 10 minutes a lot easier, then it's kind of worth it. And you kind of justify that in your head, and it becomes a bit of a mental game. I know a lot of people actually kind of put messages on my YouTube about the mental game of it, and how actually, you actually do have to convince yourself to dig deep. And that's something that does resonate with me 100%. And obviously you'll get to that point where you literally cannot hold on and you're just completely balls and you're jazzed and you're struggling. But there are times when you're just like, you just realize, and guys, obviously I recognize we're talking about a virtual computer cycling environment, esports or whatever you want to call it. This isn't hardcore life or death situations, but still, I do love that. I love the fact that you get to this point where you are struggling, and this is me now, is the guys that are obviously really strong, and I don't know, what would you probably refer to them? I heard someone refer to them as Cat B pros, and I thought that was brilliant, because it's like, those guys that are like really strong, they are Cat B riders, but they're just really strong Cat B riders. They probably don't want to go up to Cat A, so they kind of, I don't know, they have measured efforts. And the truth is that if you are riding in this big group and you are doing a little bit on the front and then sitting in the group, a little bit in the front, then you are sometimes just at the mercy of how many other good riders are in the group that will nudge up your watts per kg, which ultimately leads in you being category enforced to a category higher. So if you're not in a big group with a load of people who are also kind of Cat B pros, then the chances are you're going to spend a lot of time in Cat B doing well in races, because you were able to hold basically the group that is moving at a certain wattage and then kick on towards the end. And that's the way I see it. I don't know if you guys see it differently, then do let me know. But this was my do or die moment, was a little look at the mini map. I'm looking at the numbers that are around me. The numbers that are around me, or the people that are around me, is thinning out. So I'm not, my ability to use people's draft is dwindling. Like, if there's only one or two, basically for our little group, as we are at the back of this snake, it was so important to make sure that we were in touching distance with that front group so that we could hold that coming into the latter half of this race. Bear in mind, there is only just under 5k left, 2 point something miles, over 2.5 miles. So we really needed to kind of be there. And obviously, everyone who managed to save their feathers and their power-ups, I don't know how you did that, because I used mine way too early. But there were only 2 power-ups, obviously, coming through the start banner or after the lead-in, and then halfway through the course at the top of the KOM. So I'd already ditched mine. I had to use mine to try and hold on to this group, because I knew that if I didn't use it, then I would have fallen off the back. Falling off the back means being in a chase group, and you're effectively just, there's nothing wrong with it. You're just moving a little bit slower, but you're never going to catch that front group again. So I'm doing everything I can to try and hold this front group. And personally, I'm pretty happy with the job that I did. But I will 100% say that the first half of this race was very different. Our first half was very different to our second half. We had a very chilled out roll in kind of, it didn't feel like we were going out for a time off the start line. And I do know, for instance, that some people turn up to the 6:10 race knowing what the 5:10 result was. So they work a little bit harder off the start line. I 100%, I've been in those races. I've been in the races where in the pen they're talking about the 5:10 start and what time they have to beat. Because obviously some people ride for the GC, which I completely respect, but it does makes it quite interesting. Like, I do quite enjoy that environment and the chat that goes on sometimes. And you always know it's going to be a tough race when you do the 6:10, when people start talking about how fast the one before was, because you know that it means that it's going to be full gas from the whole way through. So that's a little tip to anyone. If you do want to have like the proper fast race, check the numbers of people in it, and then basically kind of Monday night prime time is always obviously a great race, 5:10 or 6:10 p.m. But then also the 6:10 will usually try and beat the earlier time. Holding quite good watts, or I held reasonable watts up Titans Grove KOM. That took me 4 minutes 27, holding 321 watts, which was over my FTP. I'm not quite sure what my FTP is. My Zwift FTP comes in at 288. My FTP on a ramp test is kind of 310. But I definitely cannot hold 310 for a prolonged period of time. I definitely find that when I try and hold watts over 300, that I struggle a little bit and it starts to really hurt. And especially as we now get into the last mile of this race, the Cat B pros kind of take off from the front, and I'll be honest, I don't have a very good view of the front of this race. So I'm sure there are other people that can fill you in a lot better than I can. But it looks like a few guys kind of head off nice and early and kind of kick into that last mile or so. I think there's a few guys completely on the minimap. There's 1 or 2 guys completely down the road who did a really early effort. I think they went from like over a mile out and just kind of kicked on. So that's definitely that type of riding definitely in my eyes falls into that Cat B Pro kind of style, which is the people that can just like ride with the group and then just put the watts on at the end, and they still average like 3.9 or 4 watts per kg for the finish. I'm dying a death here trying to hold on. I think some of my efforts through Titans Grove and doing some of the rolling hills really took it out of my legs and trying to hold the group. But I will say now that there's nothing miraculous on my power curve. I've now got to the point where like my improvements are small and minimal, and I have to really kind of focus on them a little bit. But still, I'm really happy with the race. Kind of not much of a sprint finish, but a finish is always a good result. Guys, I will see you guys on the next one. Thanks for joining in tonight.